Hello, hello. Welcome to our not very first, very third book of the month meeting. This month we are reading On Writing Well, or have read On Writing Well. So maybe Cullo, can you hold it up and show us the
Yeah,
book?
my camera gets blurry, so I'll try my best. But
Okay, On Writing Well. There we go. On Writing Well. So this is a book that I read 20 some odd years ago, maybe 15. I was in college. In journalism, we read this book, and it's all about how to write nonfiction effectively, and also speaks to some common issues that people face when writing throughout their career. Some of the points in there are very tactical, and I really appreciate that because in our day-to-day we're writing when we're talking to our clients, to each other, when we're producing ad copy or landing pages or social media posts or blog posts. Writing is a very important part of business and life in general, and it's also very difficult. So we'll speak about that today. So everyone on the team has had a chance to read On Writing Well, have submitted book reports, which I've reviewed. And today we're going to talk about our learnings from the book. So who would like to share some of the things that they learned from On Writing Well by William Zinsser? Matthias, can I throw it over to you?
Absolutely, you can. So some of the things, this book really was very complex, and it honestly made me realize how deep you can go into writing techniques and different styles as well. And throughout the whole journey, I guess I was also comparing it a lot to different art forms like graphic design and video production. I found that a lot of the techniques and like psychological tricks can be implemented into like video editing and graphic design as well. But some of the things, one thing was mentioning, well, first of all, a quote from Stephen King, basically kill your darlings, which is basically to get rid of anything that doesn't support the main idea. And I think this is super key, especially in our world where attention spans are really low and we need to communicate often a lot. But in doing so with little, it actually becomes more effective. Choosing the words carefully. If it's video, choosing the right clips. If it's graphic design, choosing the right, things that'll make someone stop and read and really indulge. So that was one of the things. And another one was also like how important beginnings and ends are. Sometimes we tend to overlook this and just like, sometimes we don't have a solid intro or a good outro that kind of concludes everything. So that's another thing that this book really taught me. And I have some other things, but I feel like we should
I think
everyone
like
else.
The one that you mentioned in terms of like overusing unnecessary words, I think we're all guilty of in some fashion, right? And I think William Zinsser in the book challenges the reader to try and eliminate 50% of whatever words exist on your current document, right?
Yeah.
And that's always stuck with me because now even when I craft an email, like crafting emails to clients or each other, things can be taken out of context. I think that's really the main thing, which is by having additional words, there's more opportunity for confusion and misinterpretation. And so by being succinct and using active verbs, you can really hone in on kind of what the key message is that you're trying to get across. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Sonali?
Yeah. Riaz, you're absolutely right. Like one of the main takeaways, and that's the best part of the book, the chapter on clutter, right? How we should think simpler, write simpler. Not so writing simpler will only happen when we kind of think simpler, remove that clutter from your mind, do not use unnecessary words. And he has given some beautiful examples, right? Like how these banks and schools, they not exactly schools, but banks, right? Like how they go ahead and use this cluttered writing to hide some of the things which will just to make sure that our attention do not go there. That is, I think one of the main takeaways from the book for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Really love that.
Yeah, and I think it's important because I think what William Zinsser is saying really is that often writers, especially new writers, they're afraid to be concise and short because we feel like the more words we put in, the more will come across in a good way. But really, it's actually the opposite. The less words you use, the more confident you come across, because the economy of words means that every single word needs to be more meaningful. And I like the example that you use of, with the banks having to hide things. So, Paul, welcome. I know you were on a client meeting there, so welcome to our meeting. What were some of your thoughts? Not to throw you directly on the spot. What were some of your learnings from the book?
Well, yeah, sorry, I'm late, guys. I had a really good client meeting. We'll fill you in on that after, but I learned I'm a terrible writer. No, I'm guilty of a lot of things. And, I have to admit, I did something different with this book, and I tried Audible for the first time. I won't be doing that again. I tried to put it on and nothing against it. For some people, it might work. I was playing it in the background while I was working for several days, and I don't absorb it the same way I do with paper. So it, to me, I may have missed some good meaning in that book, but what it came down to was I felt very criticized, I think, in reading some of it, and not in a bad way, in that I clutter my writing a lot. I mean, that's kind of the biggest key takeaway, is that I use a lot of words that I probably don't need to use. I'm way too conversational in my writing. So a lot of times I write emails that come across like I'm having a conversation, and I throw in a lot of excess of words that don't need to be there. And I use words to try and make myself sound smarter, I guess, to really cut to the chase. And I don't need to do that, because Riaz, you just pointed out, simplicity shows your strength. So the less words you use show that you understand what you're talking about, and you don't need to fill it up with a bunch of fluff to maybe try and hide the fact that maybe you're not as confident or whatever that sort of area you're lacking in, and you compensate by too many words or technical words or things like that. So yeah, I have a lot of improving to do in my writing, and I've noticed since I had that playing in the background, when I'm sending out my outreach emails to clients, I've probably chopped my word count in half.
I've been chopping.
I'm doing a lot of chopping, and I'm going to continue, and I'm going to keep listening out to the rest of the Audible book because I didn't get the full way through it. But there's great points in there, and I think it's just, it made me realize that I have a lot of work to do in that area for sure.
Good. All right. Ileana, what are some of your learnings?
Yeah, I love this book. This is my all-time favorite book of all time. And I have all these cute sticky notes on the top of it because it's just so good. And I want to refer to it all the time. And I read it a lot of times before, but what's so good about it, in my opinion, is that the more you read it, there's still information to pull from it. So I read it and I'm like, wow, this is so cool. The clutter thing is always ingrained in the back of the head, especially as a content writer. But being able to reread that and be oh yeah, there's some tips and tricks in here, putting it in brackets or even highlighting it, doing these little tricks to remind yourself, is this word really doing the same amount of work as all the other words? Can you get rid of it? I think that stood out a lot, as well as I really like the part in the book where he's talking about you're talking to these people who are super well versed in their subject, and perhaps you don't know anything about it, and they're going to be talking about stuff and you're what are they talking about? And so he really tells you don't be afraid to ask about that, and don't be afraid to look kind of silly or kind of goofy, asking questions to them, which is everyday knowledge, but to you you don't know what it means. So I think in terms of interviewing and just writing and having that information is really important. So I really like that part where it's just,
Mhm.
talk, don't be afraid to do it. You need to get that information and you're going to have a great conversation from it. And then I guess thirdly, I really like how they had, like he had like the pictures in there where it's like he got rid of this, and it had like I can't remember the exact word of it right now, but he's basically just proofing it and showing you how you can make it better. And I really, really like that. And there's just so much from that book that I am going to be looking back into it more often as well. Yeah, and those are just like the main things that jump out to me when I read this book.
Great. Thank you for sharing. Other thoughts? Roy, do you have any learnings you want to add in?
Yeah, pretty much echoing everybody else said about clutter. I thought it was an interesting metaphor just because you don't really think about writing as being cluttered until somebody actually points it out to you.
Mhm.
I mean, to me, it's like, it's all about information, and like you don't really realize that information is getting lost based on like the words that you're adding, because you feel like adding more words provides more information, but you're actually like losing your message. So I thought that was very, very interesting. Yeah, the idea of cutting a piece of work by like 50%, like that's shocking that you could do that and not lose information or like the writer's voice. I thought that was very interesting. And then the part about using active verbs. So active verbs push a sentence forward, and passive verbs like snap the reader's energy. I thought that was a really interesting metaphor as well. And then, so you could strategically replace a passive verb with an active verb to lead your reader forward in that sentence. And then, and things like adverbs and adjectives are unnecessary and can weaken a sentence. Never thought about it that way. I think I use a lot of adjectives and adverbs in my writing, so it's good to know that I don't have to.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. Khalil, did you want to add
Sure.
things?
Yeah, I really like the insights he had about his like self-editing process, because I think that's something that I probably am struggling with a little bit, just because he spends so much time going back and rereading his stuff, saying it out loud, taking out the clutter like we're mentioning. So I think that's an exercise in kind of maybe breaking down your ego a little bit, because you're filling your writing with color words and things that are unnecessary. So I think the example in the book was he spent like an hour on one singular sentence, which I found like kind of mind blowing, because he just cared about that sentence that much, right? And he has a passion for words. And that's also something that popped out to me, is you have to really care about words and be engaged in learning new words, because there's a bunch of new words in the book that I didn't know what it meant. So I was going to the dictionary and kind of finding out what does that word mean? So I think that's important to have like a passion for words. Those are my couple takeaways from the book.
I think like the example of the one sentence, that stuck with me too, because it's something simple, something very simple to the user or the reader can actually be very complex and have a lot of layers to it, and we could spend hours and hours. And I think that goes back to when we're building campaigns for clients, and the client's customer is scrolling on their news feed, they click on something, they get to a landing page. Our goal is to make that such a seamless experience that they think it's a part of their regular internet surfing, right? And that's why even sometimes one comma in the wrong place, or one pixel to the right or left or up or down, it can throw someone off, right? And if they get thrown off, then they start to question, why am I doing what I'm doing, right? And we don't want those friction points in a journey that's happening. So that's why it does take a long time to craft the right sentence or add copy or headline on Google, or sometimes you might be wondering, hey, why is Riaz being so nitpicky about that button being over like 1 pixel? It's not because I think it should be over there. It's because if it's not centered or in that right spot, it's going to draw attention to the fact that there's a lack of blank space on this side a little bit more than that side, and that's going to throw someone off from thinking about why they're there, which is to fill out the form and click the button and download the guide, right? They're going to start thinking about, oh, look at that button, it's kind of off, right? So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that to what you're saying is that sometimes making things simple is very difficult. It's actually very difficult to make things simpler. And our goal should be to focus on putting the energy in to make something complex, like a Google ad or a Facebook ad, very simple, you know? Okay, good. Other thoughts? Erica, do you have any learnings you want to share? Maybe not the clutter stuff, but now we're cluttering the video, so.
So I know that, like, for myself, a lot of the writing that I do is mostly like emails. So I know that like crafting a proper email, sending it out to the client, or even like just to like internally to teammates, is very important to make sure like the information is like it's clear, it's simple, it's concise. And then there's also one thing that that the book taught me, or kind of like pointed out and resonated with me, is like not only is it like the writing part, but there's also a visual part. So there's like two components for when you're actually like communicating information, is like making sure like your paragraphs are structured well, or like using formatting, or because again, to what everybody's saying, like there's that psychology part of it. So like if you're seeing something that's clumped together, or like several run-on sentences together, it may not be as pleasant to read, even though the information is clear and concise.
I think he says short words are better than longer words, short sentences are better than longer sentences, short paragraphs are better than longer paragraphs, right? And so sometimes even like in blog posts and ad text, you'll see like sometimes I put like one sentence, and people are like, but those two thoughts go together, like they should be one paragraph. But it's more about kind of that visual experience and breaking it up and chunking it and making it easier for the reader to digest, rather than a collection of similar thoughts with each other. So no, it's a good point. Okay. Other learnings, Vasvi?
Yeah, so one thing I like apart from the clutter thing, was the style and just his general attitude. So like I thought in the beginning when I started reading, I thought it was going to be people who write books, and like probably I wouldn't get a lot of learnings for, say, things that I write daily, like emails. But he actually had a lot of good points, like using active sentences. So like we did X and Y, like instead of saying it was done by us. And then like when he put those sentences next to each other, you really hear like, okay, this one sounds like really devoid of any life, and this one sounds like stuff actually got done. And I also liked his emphasis on humanity. So like a lot of times people when they try to make things sound really professional, which I want to, like when I'm writing emails, I want them to sound professional, but sometimes like I read an email and it just like looks really disconnected because you cannot like realize another human wrote it. It just reads like it has long words, long sentences. There's no active speech. So it's just like this was done and that was done. So I think that's something that I could like apply right away. And also his general attitude was like, it's difficult and you're doing it, and that's good. Instead of a lot of these books that say it's easy, so you can do it. So they kind of assume that they kind of motivate you to do something because it's easy. But this time he did the opposite. He didn't say writing is easy, so you can do it. He said writing is hard and you're doing it. So good job. And that was the hook that got me like really into the book, because I really liked the way he began the book like that.
Yeah, it's funny because I know like Paul mentioned how, you know, it's we want to write more, you know, less conversational, but the book is very conversational. It's not informal. Like there's still good structure and active verbs and active sentences, but it's very conversational. It's like a friend, you're talking to a friend and they're encouraging you, right? So I think that that's an important distinction, that it doesn't have to be informal and it doesn't have to be formal. It just has to be conversational, but using the right, applying the right tactics and methodology to it, so that it comes across as very succinct and concise and not wasting any elements.
Well, that's it. It goes back to the simplicity, right? As much as, yes, it's conversational because it's human to human, it's still throwing in a lot of extra clutter words. It's one thing in a conversation to do it, but in writing, if I wrote the way I've just spoke now, you'd ignore my email completely. So.
Awesome. Yeah, it's true. Okay, Jackie?
Yes, so it struck me, like the passive voice struck me because I keep getting notifications from Grammarly. I have it active for everything, and it keeps telling me passive voice here, so I get to correct it even on emails. I think I struggle in the same way that some of you do. I finally understood why my social studies professor in high school kept telling us, summarize this and summarize World War II again, and more and more. And we would have like 3 summaries of the same story. But I think that his point was basically, if you're able to tell the same story with simplicity, then it means you understand it. And you're able to explain it to anyone, even to a 5-year-old. So I thought that was great. I really liked how he brought on the importance of research, the importance of interviewing, the importance of looking at topic from different angles. Something that caught my eye was how there was this quote, "Don't alter your voice to fit your subject." And I think we have a big challenge because we embrace different voices when we work with different clients. And it means it brought up to me the fact it is so important to understand that voice first. So we are able to talk as that company, as that brand, and make sure we understand their culture, their terms, their tone. And that's another thing that Grammarly is great at. Hey, you're being informative, or you're being serious and too formal. So it really allows you to be aware of the tone that you're using. So I enjoyed that. And yeah, I keep getting these notifications, but I think I'm getting better at it. And I think this gave me another perspective on why making it simple, looking at the use of contractions, for example, in certain for certain projects is okay, not for others if you're being formal. So things like that that I hadn't remembered in a while. So very valuable for a business. And it also ties down with when he starts saying, remember to always think what's in it for the reader. Bring that up, which is also something we talk about in past conversations. So yeah, it's a very complete book for not being that long. So, yeah.
It's funny that you bring up Grammarly, because Michael and I were looking at it yesterday, and we were correcting something on a screen share, and it was a list of like 3 different items, and then on the last one there's like, should we put the comma there or not, right? Because some people put it and some people don't, because Grammarly was saying we shouldn't put it or should put it, and Microsoft Word was correcting us on that. So anyhow, that's I digress, but I find that it's we're always being challenged, whether we realize it or not, by kind of grammar and words, and what kind of the right position is to be taking on any of the things that we write. So no, it's good that you're using it.
Now that sorry.
Good.
No, I'm just saying, now that we spoke about Grammarly so much, it's worth mentioning that Grammarly did not sponsor this video.
Although we will maybe put an affiliate link in the ad description.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Kane, what were some of the things that you learned from the book?
Yeah, so I'm going to piggyback off Paul a lot. I'm a very chaotic writer, so I kind of have words everywhere, and just learning to shorten them down, and the simplicity part was also very important, because just I know when I write, I have it doesn't always make sense to the person who's reading it other than me. So kind of just slowing down and picking the right words before I go and write a thing. And I also tried Audible as well, and I do not like it either. I'm not a fan.
We do not sponsor Audible.
We did not.
We did not sponsor a smear campaign for Audible.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. I appreciate that, Tin. I think you raised an important point, because if you're not writing for the reader to understand, then why are you writing, right? Like why are we writing? And the entire purpose is for the reader to understand, because otherwise we're wasting our energy and effort, right? So it's good to go back and keep reducing and eliminating the clutter, being more concise with what we're saying, and positioning it better so that we are kind of being able to be understood by the most amount of readers possible.
There was a statement that I really liked, and I'm going to butcher it because I don't remember it exactly, but it was something along the lines of like, write as if it's the reader's first time encountering your writing or something like that. And I think that's really good, because because that helps you keep it clear and concise, because I think that with that approach, you're trying to put your best foot forward every time you write. I mean, that kind of goes to all the other points of write it and rewrite it a million times over until you're happy with it. But I thought that comment really stood out for me, and like, okay, they don't know me, they don't know my writing. Let's do this like it's my best foot forward every single time.
Absolutely. All right, Michael Crow, Mr. Michael Crow.
Hello. Right, yeah. One of the big things that stood out for me was the emphasis on the reader experience, I think, which interests me because in our line of work, we're always thinking about the user experience and how somebody perceives something that we're putting out on the internet, whether that's a content piece or an ad or a landing page, whatever that might be. And the thing that really stood out to me the most was his observation about musical patterns and meters, or where he kind of went down that path. I thought that was great, because I think he was saying, listen for musical patterns and meters in your writing. Like, be careful about your writing. Listen for the rhythm. Listen for how it's listen to how it's coming across, how the person hears it, if you like, while they're reading it, how they absorb it. And I think that's really important. And there's been a lot said about clutter here, obviously, and we've been talking about, I think Paul was talking about conversational style in his writing. I actually I have to say, I have a soft spot for conversational style in writing. So I'm going to contradict the book a little bit by just saying, I like the use of words in order to add color to something, in order to give a sentence a certain rhythm or pattern or meter. And I find that books that are written that way, any kind of content or even copy that's written, copy is really good for this, by the way. It makes it just a lot more enjoyable to take in, and it sticks better. So from a copy context, I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. But if we were to say, write like a blog of, say, 500 words or something, that rhythm becomes really important, because it actually ends up kind of driving, it assists the reader while they're reading the content. It drives them through the content. And I find the books that take a less amount of time, I suppose, to read, the ones that aren't so hard to read, even if they're quite sizable books, are the ones that have that consistent rhythm throughout, because it kind of drives the experience. So that was something that really stood out to me. Yeah,
it's almost like there's friction, like those books that we say, oh, it's hard to get through, or they're boring or dry. It's usually because it's very choppy and the ideas are disconnected, or there's additional words that kind of stop you in your track, in your mind. Whereas in this book, I found this book to be, I kind of flew through it because of the fact that even though it's as long as the other ones, it was just a little bit more concise and coherent and clear and frictionless. So it's a good point there. All right, in terms of some other learnings, before we move on to how we're going to apply what we learned, some of the things that stood out to me were some of the things that were mentioned, certainly active verbs and eliminating 50% of words. The 4 areas really stood out: clarity, simplicity, brevity, and humanity, right? And I think we touched on all of those in some capacity, but I think it's still important to remember what those headers are: clarity, simplicity, brevity, and humanity. I also liked that he kind of spoke about like not using cliches as much, or not using metaphors, and coming up with original metaphors. I'm a big fan of this, because especially in ad copy, when you create your own metaphors, and for example, if I said you could fill a stadium of people with that many people, you could fill a stadium, right? 20,000 ad impressions might not sound like a lot, but if I say, okay, imagine I could fill the stadium, right? Or if I could fill, 30 buses, or I don't know what the math is there, but if you start to kind of compartmentalize things into your own metaphors that people can relate to, then it becomes a lot more clear, and it's original. So it's not expected or suspected, which I think is what he said: suspected or expected. And the other thing I liked is aspire to be careful, right? Aspire to be careful. I think more recently I've been less careful, and I'm sure all of you have received a sentence from me recently in which a word was missing, I think. And you can probably think, oh yeah, like that's the word that he meant, right? But I should aspire to be more careful, I think. And so going back and reading before hitting send to make sure the to or the is not missing. So good. Okay, in terms of applying what we learned, so you can happy to, how are we going to apply what we've learned in On Writing Well to our day-to-day business? And who would like to go first?
I might go first.
I'll go on, Matthias.
Yeah, one thing that stood out to me was testing, the test for unity, I guess. And this is something that we've actually mentioned before. Michael and I, we've had conversations about aesthetics and making sure that everything is cohesive and consistent. So that was something that stood out to me, the test for unity. Some of the things that you can do to kind of test this would be to make sure you have the appropriate tone, level, and style for your audience. Make sure you're consistent in your perspective of the perspective of your writing. Consistent within like the tense, like past tense, future tense, that sort of thing in your paragraph. Use and maintain appropriate formal style. And at the end, what is the single point I'm trying to get across? Like that, I think is super key. And something that he mentioned that I thought was pretty interesting is the fact that, it might be a bit self-explanatory, but readers process in a linear sequence, right? When they're reading. So he mentions that paragraphs should be like the single idea. Like you should structure your paragraphs as like the single idea, and then the sentences are what support that idea. So he mentioned that he works for paragraphs, right? Instead of like, every single word, every single sentence at first, you want to make sure you have a solid paragraph, and then kind of like break it down from there, making sure that every sentence supports the main idea of that paragraph. And he also mentions kind of like the structure of things, where like this kind of reminded me of like grade 10 English class with like point proof comment when writing essays, which is basically, he mentions that you should have a structure before you even start writing, which I think is very smart. And it kind of breaks it down into like, the first thing is like the topic or the main idea, I guess. Then you go into your evidence or anything that kind of like supports that and gets you even more excited about the topic. And then within the paragraphs, you have these bridges, right? So the bridges between the supporting idea of the current paragraph and the next one. So you're always kind of connecting the paragraphs in that sense. And then the conclusion, which is super important, as important as the intro. So
these are all excellent points. How do you think we would apply some of these points or some of the other points that were mentioned or that you read through? How would we apply that kind of to what we're doing on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I honestly think the structure that I just mentioned kind of goes in hand with like the funnel and the way we design creatives. And the test for unity, I mean, everything I mentioned could be used for an email, it could be used for a strategy. A lot of these things can actually be implemented into a lot of the things that we do. And testing for unity across all departments here before anything leaves the agency is, I think, super key. Just to kind of check the work before it goes out. Absolutely.
Good. Thank you. Michael, you want to share some of your ways that we can apply what we've learned?
Sure. Matthias, love that, by the way. Great observations, mate. It's actually one thing that I think I shared with you, Riaz, yesterday, that I got from this that I thought was poignant. So I'm paraphrasing. This may not be the quote. I did my best to kind of capture it because I listened to it on Audible. So I would sort of capture things that I heard and I'd like type it down, like type it, save it. So some of it's missing, but this is the paraphrase. You'll find that your first effort is very stiff. You will need some time to relax and find your natural voice. He's talking about writing a memoir. He's talking about writing a memoir. You'll find that the second version is a bit warmer. You may not use much of the work you did in the first effort. You probably felt a little wooden, a little looking over your shoulder. The first month wasn't wasted. You couldn't have done the second without the first. Gradually find your style, the person you sound like, the person you are. Talk like yourself. And this, every single one of you here, like you can apply that to everything that you can think back to things that you've done when you made a career change, maybe when you're at university, maybe like whatever it might be, like as a parent, even like in your own personal life. But I just found that to be really poignant. And I want to mention that within the context of what we do at work, because there are always going to be challenges that we come up against, either ones that we fully embrace, like maybe, you take a step up in your career, maybe there's a promotion or something and you're a little bit out your comfort zone at the beginning. Or maybe there's a challenge that comes about that's, I don't know, like project oriented or client oriented. After a while, you realize that some of the things that you might have done wrong in the first sort of effort contributed to you getting it right on the third or fourth effort. And I think there's always that a sense of being overly aware of ourselves in those situations as well, but that's okay. That's what it's all about, right? And then after a while you get your rhythm and you feel good about what you're doing and you accomplish it and you move on. But I just love that because I totally could align that to what we do every day.
You've touched on a very, very important point. And I mean, to protect the identity of some of our clients, I won't mention any client names specifically, but I can think back to some recent examples of where this actually happened, right? Where we thought, oh yeah, this creative or this content piece is great. And then we went back to the drawing board and did another version. And then everyone started, oh, okay, we got warm, right? We're starting to be warm. And then the third time we did it, was like, okay, now we're onto something. And then the fourth time, it's like, oh, wow, we've knocked it out of the park, right? So I think if we can be humble enough to know that we're not going to have a home run the very first time and plan to kind of fail on the first few times, then we know the third, fourth, fifth time, it's going to be that much easier. And so that way we're preparing for the fourth time, not the first time. And we're building that into our process rather than trying to hit a home run on the very first swing, right? We got to warm up and then do it. So, and I think some of you are nodding because you're probably knowing which clients I'm talking about, right? So I think that's very important. And I think also we should embrace it, even in things like in the sales world, where it's like, if you make a sale on the very first call of your day, that's an outlier. You're an anomaly, right? So we should, I think, prepare to move towards making the mistakes and feel comfortable failing so that we can be successful in the long run. Because to be honest, people forget the failures. They only remember the successes, right? I probably couldn't name any of the failures anyone on this call has had recently. I can probably think of successes though. So, and I think the same could be said about myself as well. So good. I really like that point, Michael. Thanks for bringing that one up. All right, who wants to go next? Yeah, Jackie, go ahead.
Excuse me, Riaz, I have to go to a meeting, but thank you so much.
No
Talk
problem.
soon.
Excellent. Enjoy. Thanks for participating. All right. All right. Other ways that we can apply what we learned in On Writing Well to our organization. V, you look like you're ready to say something. Yeah.
So one thing that I learned was keeping it simple and like making it conversational, because I think like a lot of times when I'm writing an email, like the tendency is to make it sound professional and like we know stuff. But then this book pointed out like in writing like that, you kind of like lose the point. But I think a lot of our clients are like us because it feels like they're working with a team that understands them. So if we make our emails like too robotic and take the humanity out of it, like it works like against us. So that's one thing like I can start applying right away. And like it had a lot of good tips on like how to exactly accomplish it. Like the book wasn't like have more humanity and then it would like not give you any like answers to it. He told you like don't say I would like to point out, just point it out. So I really like that part where he said very like put something in front of the sentence and then I would like to highlight, and then you highlight something, just highlight it.
Yeah.
I really like that.
I love that. And it's actually, no, I like that point because at the end of the day, written communication is just another form of communication. And the point of communication is to connect with other people, the recipient of that communication, right? So as long as you're connecting, then you don't have to be overly formal or even informal. As long as you are tapping into the humanity of the recipient and the person that you're communicating with. I'm pretty sure there's been some Zoom calls that some of you have been on with me where we've been in front of a client and I said something and you thought to yourself, how does Riaz get away with saying some of these things? And it might be a joke or it might be something that might be a bit like offside, but because of the tone and the way I'm saying it, it's actually doing the job of connecting us as humans behind on the other side of the screen. Which is even more important in the virtual world. And I'm not saying to go out there and say offset comments, but that's just an example of why humanity trumps, sometimes the form and format of things. Cool.
Yeah, so that's one thing I can apply to my emails and like calls right away. Keeping the texts simple and easy to read. So like a lot of times, like with copy, like we want to point out like 5 different things, but then like really challenging yourself to make it shorter and shorter. Like it puts you in a mindset where you're questioning like, okay, do I need to like point out these 5 things or do I only need to point out these 2 things, which are like the most important? Because like in the copy, it's very important that you only like mention, like you only have a limited amount of space. Like sometimes if people read more and there's like 3 paragraphs, like they might not even read the first 2 sentences. So like that's something that I can also apply. And yeah, like practicing more with writing. So one thing he said was writing is the only thing that you like, the only way you're gonna get better at writing is like continue writing. Like it's not that you read this book and like next day my emails like they're completely like flawless, but you need to keep practicing, and then eventually over time everything that you learned, you like develop your style, you get better at it. So yeah, just continue writing. That would be the first thing.
I think I like what you're saying because it almost sounds like, make it as easy as possible for the receiver or for the recipient to get the information. You probably would have noticed on some of the decks that I do on Mondays or even on emails, sometimes I'll bold the active verb, right? So that someone, because everyone scans, right? Everyone's brain shuts off when they have to look at text sometimes, right? So especially now that there's video and on the internet and things are evolving in terms of communication methods. And so the more you can add in terms of like, call outs, whether it's bold or italicizing something, so that when someone scans it, it's like, oh yeah, active verb, oh, like pertinent information. It's going to make it that much easier, right? And then they would be more inclined to read the rest of it to get the additional context there too as well. So good learnings in terms of keeping the text short. Good. Other things that we can apply to our organization going forward. Roy, did you have some thoughts? Yeah.
So unlike probably most of the people here, I actually don't like writing much at all. And that's why like my profession doesn't require me to actually write a lot. I don't think I'd ever be a copywriter. That'd be a nightmare. So yeah, I never enjoyed writing. Like I've always felt writing was always like a chore, and like it always felt like work. And a lot of people are like, oh, you should start a blog on like restaurants or have good. I generally have good gear for like the things that I do, and like, oh, you should like write reviews. I'm like, I would, but I just hate writing, so I would never do that. But anyway, so like I think this book was kind of eye-opening. Like I'm hoping like some of these techniques will make me write, like make me enjoy writing more, I guess, or at least hate it less. So one of the things that was sort of reaffirming for me is that the topic that writing is hard, and then few sentences usually come out right the first time. So that was kind of encouraging, because most things that I write just sound terrible, and I usually have to rewrite. And it always feels like I'm taking much longer to write something than it should. So that was good that I can recognize that. Yeah, rewriting is not necessarily a bad thing. Is that it usually comes out better the second time. Yeah, and then removing clutter. I think that was a really good point. Actually, one thing that I've always done, and that was mentioned in the book, is to read what you wrote out loud, so that you actually like hear what you wrote. And something that I do a lot. So this is sort of like a pro tip. I know on the Mac there's a very good text to speech, and like in the accessibility settings, you can turn on a shortcut where you hit Option Escape, and anything that's highlighted will read back to you. So I usually do that quite often. So like I'll select the paragraph that I've written, Option Escape, and then it'll read back to me. And like the computer voices are so much better than they used to be. So it doesn't actually sound like a robot. Like if you go into the settings and change it to one of the more natural language or natural speech settings, like they sound like a human. And like they actually like you can hear them take breaths as if like the machine is breathing, because like a human would take a breath at this comma, for example, as a pause, which is like, I don't know, when I first heard it, it was fascinating to me.
I love that.
So yeah, so it's a pro tip if anybody would, rather than reading it out loud, if somebody can read it back to you and you don't have anybody around, you can just make the computer do it for you.
It's funny you say that, because when I did journalism school, that was one of the techniques, reading it out loud, but then also reading it in like a monotonous voice. Because usually when it's like the human voice is good, I think that's great. But one thing that we would do is read it out loud, but like in this monotonous robotic voice, so that you can interpret it from the other person's perspective, right? So, or even reading it backwards. So like reading the last word, like, and so it's there's a lot of these techniques, but I love the Option Escape pro tip. So that's great. And I will also admit something, that I am not a huge fan of writing either, which might come as a surprise, given that I did many years of journalism and have hundreds of published articles. The reason I actually moved onto what they call the dark side in the journalism world, the advertising side, was because I just lost, I had the skills, but not the passion for writing anymore. So it's not to say I don't write anymore. Obviously you all know that I do, but I think it's important to tap into our love and distaste for any communication method, and work to improve in the areas that we're not strong, and embrace and strengthen upon the areas that we are strong. Thank you, Roy. How can we apply what we learned in On Writing Well to our organization? Ileana, do you want to, or Sonali?
Yeah, sure. I can go next. I love writing. Yeah, I love writing, like very opposite. I love writing. And although English is not my first language, guess what? When I write it, I'm very proud of it. I'm like, you know what? I did a great job. And when but that's not the truth. I just feel like within myself, I'm like, you know what? I nailed it. But when I kind of reread it and go through it, like I just kind of feel like, I can do better. But this book is amazing. I'm reading this book for the first time, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to learn so many things. I'm going to become a writer. Who knows? But then I was like, okay, now I have to only focus on things I really can apply on my job on a day-to-day basis, especially Riaz. And I don't want to repeat myself like a broken record, but I really love the chapter on clutter, and I'll just explain why it is so important. And if we go back to the chapter where the writer mentioned about business writing, right?
Mm.
He really mentioned that how important it is for us to take the writing seriously. And that kind of struck with me because we are representing our brand, we are representing our client's brand, and writing is a huge part of that. We write emails, we write ads, we write content on the landing page. Even small, even like errors, like forget about grammar, even spelling errors kind of are embarrassing mistakes. So I think that is something, taking it seriously. When I say taking it seriously, just going through it, just making sure that, just double checking that everything is written correctly is one of the learnings I'm going to apply on a day-to-day basis. And second is obviously, as Bazvi and Roy mentioned, making it shorter. It is extremely important for us because when we write Google ads and Facebook ads, we have, and even on Facebook ads nowadays, it clearly mentions that when you go over certain characters, it is not optimized properly. So how to make it shorter, how to make longer sentences shorter and keep it crisp to the point is extremely important. And I obviously we need to apply it, on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, and then the third learning would be clear thinking. Clear thinking is the solution, because if you, and I think I touched upon that point when I was speaking earlier, clear thinking will lead to better writing. And I totally, completely agree with that, because if you're not thinking clearly, you will eventually not be able to write shorter sentences, because like that's what you want to achieve, right? So yeah, I would say these three would be my learnings and how I can apply.
Good. I'm glad that you like writing.
Yeah, I do.
We should talk about your book report after, though. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate that. And clutter is important. I know we've emphasized it. Clutter is very important. Ileana?
Hello. It might come as a surprise to you guys, but I also love writing.
What? No.
I know. I love writing. So we've touched on clutter as well, like, and simplicity. So I won't touch that again, but other parts that are like key takeaways for me in regards to like applying it moving forward is, and I quoted it here, he wrote, "If it amuses you in the act of writing, put it in. It can always be taken out, but only you can put it in." And I think that really stands out because it reminds me of, I'm not going to mention which client, but there was a client where I was just like, okay, you know what? I'm going to like embrace my inner like dad humor and see what I can come up with. And I'm like, only I can put this in. If they don't like it, they can take it out. But if I don't put it in the first place, then it's never going to come to existence. So try it out. And they were like, oh, well, yeah, like we like this. So taking more risk in terms of moving forward for that, embracing the dad humor if it needs to come out, that kind of stuff. I really like that. And then another part that really stood out is if you're having trouble trying to write about a subject, if you write it from your perspective and then eventually switch it at the end to third person, because typically they aren't written from like your perspective, but that way, because it's a lot easier to write as you. I don't know if I'm explaining this properly or not, but I thought that really was super interesting. So just doing that, and then it's like, okay, you have the piece done. Now you're going to go in and you're just going to adjust a few of just like how it is like spoken, change like the tenses and stuff, and then you're good to go. So I'm definitely going to try that out with some of the like more complex ideas. So that's super exciting. And then, yeah, and then really just like, I like how he talks about how even a dry subject, if you're passionate about it, can be like super great and fun to read. There are some examples in the book where he puts them in, you're like, wow, like that was actually really interesting to read, but it was like the most boring subject in the whole entire world. So really just keeping the passion no matter what it is and just having that shine through. So those are some of the takeaways that I'm going to be incorporating in my writing.
Nice. Very nice. Who wants to go next in terms of what we can apply to our organization?
I'll go next.
Sure.
the clutter is obviously the biggest one. Everyone's touched on it, and I'm very, very guilty of that. So that's first improvement, writing simple. But Sonali made a great point, and it's the clear thinking produces clear writing. And I find myself in this a lot of days where I may have a lot of stuff going on, or, feeling defeated because of getting said no to a bunch of times. And I'll still pound out a bunch of prospecting emails or LinkedIn messages. And I think sometimes in those occasions, I need to take a step back and maybe not do it at that time, because I might not be in the right mindset, and what I'm putting out there might come across in what I'm sending out. So I think sometimes it's finding that, like you said, when you have momentum after a win or something, that's the time, because you're thinking maybe clearer and you've got some motivation behind what you're putting out there. So I think it's capitalizing on those moments when I'm really going to be doing a lot of writing. Like Roy and like you, I really don't like writing. I love conversations. I love meeting people. I like sitting and getting to know people and asking questions. Writing is always a struggle for me. So I think it's trying to capitalize on those moments when I'm in the mood and I'm in the right mind frame. And that's when I should be doing all of my writing. And another big part is not assuming that people understand what I'm talking about. Digital marketing can be really complex, and sometimes maybe I make the assumption that because somebody is a VP of marketing, that they understand, some of the terminology in and around targeting and digital marketing and demand generation, but they may not. Being complex, it goes back to the simplicity side of things. So yeah, I have a lot of work to do in the writing side of things.
You brought up a lot of good points. I think the one that you said something that triggered something in my head about how I try and create writing, and it's I'll have like my notepad on my phone, and we'll just put out the thoughts or structure the thoughts that I want to convey in the presentation or the email or whatever it is. And that one thought, those thoughts might be like one word bullet points, right? Mm-hmm. So you have, at the end of it, you have like 4 or 5 of these bullet points, and now you're structuring paragraphs and sentences around that thought. And I find that when you start by being concise, it's easier to stay focused on what the point you're trying to get across is, because when you wrote it as one word, you knew what it was, right? Or you had the idea in your head, and then it's about weaving the context around it while keeping it concise. So yeah, I think organizing thoughts by having a clear head is super important.
For sure. And just for context, like, this is what my notebook looks like after a conversation. So, organizing my thoughts and decluttering are, huge takeaways for me that I need to really, really improve upon.
Great. What else do we need to apply or want to apply from the book to our day-to-day? Erica, did you have thoughts?
Yeah. Thank you. I have like this love-hate relationship with writing. I do like writing. I prefer to write, but then sometimes depending on like the topic, I might not enjoy it as much or I struggle more. So then therefore I don't enjoy it as much. But just to, on the topic of like being able to like make your writing more concise and simple, I think one of the things that I would want to mention is like being also cognizant of like who your audience is, and like which phase you are in like the cycle, because depending on like if you're at the very beginning, you might be talking to somebody who's not as informed or knowledgeable on the topic, and so therefore you may want to be a little bit more specific or choose your words differently than when you were talking to somebody who's further down the road in the journey of our business. And that goes back to like at the very beginning, doing your research and understanding your audience, understanding like who you're talking to. That's kind of one of the things that like I would want to apply to what we do.
Absolutely. I like that you talk about the journey, because our clients and our clients' customers, they're also on their own journey about how aware they are of their product or service, their brand, in the middle of the funnel about the education, enlightenment, and entertainment. So we call it engagement, which is this middle of the funnel. But really what it is educating, entertaining, and enlightening, so that people, the client's customers, understand what the product service offering is and how it works and what makes it different. We call it FAQs a lot of the time, right? And writing for that audience who already knows who you are is going to be very different than writing for someone who you're educating on it. And then going down even further in the funnel in terms of conversion, right? How you're trying to write a landing page or a nurturing email, or the way you talk to a prospect that you're going to try and close, right? Or the client's customer who's at that end of the funnel there. You're going to be a little bit more benefits focused and kind of a little bit more aggressive in terms of how this solution is going to help alleviate the pain that they're experiencing, right? So it kind of ties into spin selling a little bit too, in terms of how you write based on the stage that whether our client or our client's customers are in their journey as well. Good. Other thoughts? Khalil, do you have any?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I loved what he said about clear writing is a result of rewriting, because I think sometimes when we're writing, we can get married to certain ideas and sentences and words even that might not exactly serve the client. So I think rewriting is a big element of the whole process. You can get all your ideas down at once and have a fully fleshed out blog, but going back and pruning and making sure that all those sentences kind of again serve the client is important, that I'm going to be implementing for sure. He also said learning is a tonic in writing. So a writer is continually learning and getting educated, and that can be about writing itself or about the client's industry or whatever product or service they have. I think that's a double approach you can take there. And just going into your environment and using that as inspiration. Sometimes you just have to let a piece sit and walk away and maybe, sleep on it or go walk outside or something and come back, and you can look at it with a fresh perspective, which will definitely help you, see it in a little bit of a different light. So I think that's huge. Also developing a voice for each client. I think in writing, we all have our own natural tendency when it comes to tone and voice. So I think maybe doing a little bit of research and kind of seeing what they've done in the past. And that goes along with the education and learning about the client. And I think that's definitely a big thing. And something that wasn't in the book, but something that I'm going to be implementing a little bit better is trying to get into that state of flow. Because I think we have a lot of distractions. Like you have your phone. I'm across from a school, so I hear kids get out at noon and lunchtime. So there's a lot of things happening at all times. So that's why it's good to have noise canceling headphones, but definitely going to try to remain in that state of flow for as long as possible.
Great. Yeah, all great takeaways. Good. Who else? Have I forgotten anyone in terms of applications? Kane, did you want to share some of the things that you'll apply to your day-to-day?
Yeah, so as you probably know, I hate writing as well as some of the others here. But the one that stood out to me the most was clutter, and then rereading it out loud. That's something I definitely guilty of not doing. And I feel like especially in sales, sometimes you're rushing to, create a message for multiple people at once or a different message, and you're just trying to get them out as fast as possible. And I think really maybe taking the extra 2 minutes to reread that message and craft it a bit better than it was could really benefit in the final result of sending that message.
Awesome. Okay. Any additional final thoughts that anyone want to share? I think in the interest of not cluttering up this video, we will stop talking about On Writing Well, and we will move forward to our next book, Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. This guy's great. He's actually a marketing writer and has built his whole business around this concept of story brand. And I don't want to ruin the book, but essentially there's 7 to 9 kind of archetypical story lines that are used in major motion pictures. So sometimes you'll maybe watch a movie and be like, hey, this is like the exact same as that movie, except like the protagonist is this and that situation is that, right? So we go over, in this book, he'll go over some of those, the structure of some of our major motion pictures and the way the seven key universal story points that all humans respond to. So we're going to essentially understand by the end of this a framework that successful stories use, and that we and how we can actually create frameworks for our businesses and our clients' business as well when we're helping to build out their story brand. So if you're following along and watching it, check out Story Brand. And if you like this book of the month, Khalil, you'll be happy about this call to action. If you like this book of the month, subscribe to this video, like this video, hit the bell notification so you can stay up to date on all of our books of the month, plus the other videos that we put out on a weekly basis as well. Thanks everyone for joining. Looking forward to chatting next month on building a story brand. Have a great day.